Well, hello, welcome back to the Learn and Work Smarter podcast. I'm your host, Katie, and this is episode 140. Today's episode was inspired by a post I saw in a Facebook group that I belong to. I belong to an alumni Facebook group of the college that I graduated from as an undergrad. And the Facebook group is full of really smart people, but there was a question in there that literally made me stop my scroll. Now, please know that I am not being judgmental and saying it was a dumb question at all. Like, it was not. It was just a hard reminder to me that skills are everything. Not that I needed to be reminded of that, but it made me realize that, that is the message that I need to lean into. Now, someone had posted in the group looking for advice. An acquaintance I'm going to give you the context and then I'm actually going to read the exact response. But anyway, an acquaintance had reached out to this person saying, hey, I have someone who would love to connect with you. They're looking for job connections. Would it be okay if I introduced you? This is like a very, normal way to connect with and reach people. Happens on like LinkedIn all the time, right? The woman said, absolutely. And then an email was sent where the three of them were all on the email as like a formal introduction, right? Now, the woman had not heard a peep from I guess I'll just call her like an underling, the younger one, and it had been a whole week. And that is when she reached out to the Facebook group and said, hey, I was contacted. I'm willing to do this person a favor. We were introduced on an email and I still haven't heard from her at this point. There is no way I am interested in this connection now at this point, and there is no way that I'm going to pass along her name or really want to do her any favors. And she was asking our alumni group, am I being too harsh in this response or feeling this way? Now, the comments in the Facebook group thread were like, yikes, like no way, if you're correct, if she's not interested, if she's not showing initiative, if she's not showing communication skills, this isn't a person that like you want to stand behind and like risk your reputation on. Now, like all of the comments had that same vibe to them. Like, man, that is not someone who's worth your time. And this is a very loving, compassionate, empathetic Facebook group I belong to. Okay. So like, don't think that people aren't being compassionate. They're just business people who are like, yeah, no, this is not how it works. Now, that is not even what made me stop my scroll at all. Something else did. So there was this one comment, unlike all of the others, and that is the one that inspired the entire episode today. I'm going to read the exact words here. Let me call it up on my screen. Okay, this post makes me sad. How many career opportunities have I apparently missed out on because I had no idea this rule existed and did not reply fast enough? How do people learn this unsaid rule if no one teaches it to them? Okay, now that's the comment that really got me thinking. This is a community of really smart people. Okay, somebody in this group was like, wait, I must have missed out on a ton of things in my life because I didn't know replying to somebody within a week was an appropriate thing. How am I supposed to know that if nobody ever taught me? Now, that is exactly why I have this podcast. That is exactly why I have my programs. That is exactly why I do what I do, because these skills are not taught in school and they're not taught on your first day at the job. And we don't just naturally learn these skills just because like we get older every year. Some of us do. Some of us observe. We're going to talk about that today. But like, where else would you learn them? And as you can tell from that woman's response, not having these skills can lead to significant missed opportunities and opportunities that you didn't even know you're missing. Now, I have a previous episode, it's episode number 46, called How to Be Professional. In that episode, I dive really, really deep into some of these skills as well. Okay, that episode is not about how to be a professional, but how to be professional. I defined being professional as a result of experience, education, and time. But it's more of a behavior, a series of actions, and a code for how we present ourselves in the context of work. That's actually how I defined it, like word for word, pretty much, in that episode. Now, I will leave that linked below, but I think code is the right word here. And may I go further and say that some might call it a secret code. Today's episode is all about how to know what that secret code is. If you have all this figured out and this episode isn't for you, then please forward it to somebody who is maybe graduating soon or who is new to their workforce. as a sign of your love to them. And also, may I ask you a favor? If you're watching this on YouTube, please make sure you're subscribed to the show. Say hi in the comments. If you're listening in a podcast app, make sure you follow the show. Come find me on TikTok and Instagram so that we can stay connected between our Thursday episodes. Okay, lots to cover. Let's get started. Hello, you are listening to the Learn and Work Smarter podcast, the podcast for students and professionals who want to learn and work smarter. I'm your host, executive function coach, and founder of schoolhabits.com, Katie Azevedo. As a reminder, everything I mention in today's episode will be linked in the show notes, including a link to the transcript, which you can also find at learnandworksmarter.com/podcast. All right, so just a quick reminder, it's episode 46. It's all about how to be professional. And if you're looking for a deep dive into the specific skills that make you look good and stand out as someone who has all their stuff together, that is definitely the episode you want to check out. Today's show is more about how do you even know what these things are in the first place. And I want to start basic, okay? I'm going to start with the key, the absolute foundation to cracking the code, knowing that there is one. Now, I'm not talking about conformity and doing what everyone else is doing. That's not what this is about at all. But in whatever context you find yourself, in a classroom, in an internship, in a meeting, at a conference, there is a code. This is called reading the room. There is an assumed way to act that is considered appropriate for that context. Now, we don't need to be all stiff and stuffy and, do what everybody else is doing. You can still be yourself. I am always my weird little self wherever I go, but I know the rules. And even more important than that, I know that there are rules. That is step one, knowing that there are unspoken, implied rules wherever you go. Now, the poor woman in the Facebook group was like, wait, I didn't even know there were rules. We don't want that for you. Okay, so how do we figure out what's expected of you when nobody explicitly tells you? How do you crack the code that nobody hands you the key to? There are 3 places that you can look for clues, and we're going to talk about each one of them today. And when you start paying attention to these 3 things, you get a whole lot better at figuring out what a situation requires of you without waiting for somebody to spell it out or without making a significant faux pas that's hard to recover from. We all make mistakes. We're all going to get it wrong once in a while, okay? But the goal is to not do that all of the time. All right, so let's start with number 1, reading the room. And I mean this both literally and figuratively. In whatever context you find yourself, in a classroom, in an internship, in a meeting, in a conference, there are clues all around you. Everywhere you find yourself, there is a way to be, a way to talk, a way to hold yourself that is appropriate for that occasion. For example, a meeting with your manager is not the place to show up with a sandwich. But if you're having a working lunch with your colleagues, it's probably fine to bring your sandwich. How do I know that's the rule? Is there a rule book? There is not. But it starts by knowing that, again, in every situation, there are rules. There are etiquette guidelines that, for better or worse, I'm not saying it should be like this. I'm just saying that these exist. These guidelines, etiquette guidelines exist. And if we color outside them too far, it can impact our reputation and the impression that we make on others. So to kind of repeat myself, step 1 of being the kind of person who can read a room is knowing that every room you walk into needs to be read. And when you know that every room you walk into needs to be read, you can do exactly that. So for people with autism spectrum disorder, this reading the room can be a challenge, okay? But still, if you're listening to this and you have autism spectrum disorder, there's still concrete strategies that I'm going to share today that can help you say, okay, when this happens, I do this. If this, then this. And that can be really helpful for people with neurodiversity who are I struggle to read the room. Okay, so this episode is still stick around here. Okay, but let's talk about what exactly we are reading when we walk into a room. There's a couple different things that we want to sort of scan for. We're reading for the volume. How loud are people talking? Is it a room or a scenario in which only one person is talking at a time? Are people raising their hands, or is it more of a conversation back and forth and the interjections are okay? We're taking a moment to look around wherever you are and to scan for the people and the voices and the behaviors. And you're getting a sense of what the tone is. Now, some guiding questions can be, what are other people doing? Who has authority here? What is the energy? How formal is this? How much are other people talking? When do people interrupt, or do they interrupt at all? What does the person's face or body language tell you? Again, if you have autism spectrum disorder, that is going to be a tough one. Am I taking up more space than the situation warrants? Like literally, physically, like at the table, is everybody just have one notebook in front of them and you're like, well, I brought my 5 screens, right? Well, then we don't match the picture. Okay, we're trying to match the picture here. Is what I'm saying, appropriate here, even if there's nothing inherently wrong with saying it? Essentially, these are questions that when we walk into a room, we're kind of doing like a mental inventory. But the core question of all of that, if I could just distill all of those questions down, okay, the core question you want to think about and answer in any scenario is this: what does this situation require of me? What is this particular situation telling me about how I'm expected to behave? Now, you might not like that this is how it works, but this is how it works. There is a way to integrate yourself in a space that aligns with what is expected of people there. That's just how it is. Don't shoot the messenger. And when we stray too far from that expectation, it doesn't give a good impression. It can make us seem unprofessional. It can sometimes make us seem arrogant, even if you're not at all, but that's just the impression that it gives. Ignorance, too, all things that we're trying to avoid. Now, I'm not saying that there is no room for personality. Of course not. But reading the room means knowing how far you can push, where the boundaries are, and how to be authentically yourself within those unspoken boundaries. But reading the room only gives us information about what's happening like in that particular context, in that one moment. A lot of the unwritten rules that we're talking about aren't things that you're going to pick up from just one meeting or one interaction. You kind of figure them out by paying attention over time. And that brings us to number 2, read the patterns. So all day long, we are exposed to information about these secret rules. People are giving you the answer to the question, what is expected of me in this situation, right? That was the question we're asking ourselves when we're trying to read a room. It's just on you to intentionally observe and look for these patterns. Now, I'm going to go back to the example at the top of the episode about the woman who had no idea that there was an appropriate time frame to reply to emails. She could have avoided that situation entirely by knowing that there were rules, and then more intentionally over time, having observed the email habits of competent people around her. I am sure that she has sent emails in the past. And if you're on the lookout for these patterns and you know that you're struggling with these implied rules and knowing what they are, email would definitely be a place to start and to say, okay, well, what are other competent people doing? How many days usually go by before I get a reply from somebody? What do their emails look like? How are they written? How are they signed? And we're looking for these patterns and we're taking note of them and then we're emulating them ourselves. We need more than one thing to make a pattern, right? So getting one email back within a day doesn't mean that it's now an email rule that you have to follow, like always reply in a day. I don't, absolutely not. But we observe it over time, and then you can generalize a rule from the patterns that you are observing. Now, another example of something that you could observe in order to formulate a reasonable rule around would be about like when people arrive at meetings. So let's say that over time at your company, everybody is always arriving to meetings 5 minutes early. And you're thinking to yourself like, wait a minute, the meeting starts at 11, so I can show up at 11. The email invite says 11. But aren't you noticing that everybody is showing up at 10:55 every single meeting? That's a pattern. And if it happens all the time, if competent people are showing up 5 minutes early, then that's the rule. And 11 o'clock becomes too late. Now, in that case, nobody is explicitly saying, hey, at this company, we show up to all meetings 5 minutes early, but if you observe those around you and that's what everybody else is doing, then that's going to be the expectation. And that's going to be what's expected of you in that kind of situation. Zoom meetings. Let's say that you start at a new company and you've got your first Zoom meeting and you don't know whether like cameras are on or maybe they're off, and you log in and you do a quick assessment of reading the virtual room, I guess, and you might say, okay, most people have their cameras on. That might be the rule. But then the next meeting you log into at the same company and maybe people don't have their cameras on, and you'd ask yourself, okay, well, what's the difference between these meetings? The first one where everybody had their cameras on was when the boss was there. And then the meeting where there were no cameras on was when it was just people sort of in my department, like my colleagues. And so that if that happens again more than once, that would be a pattern, and you could make a general rule that says, okay, when we're at meetings with fancy people, we put the cameras on. But when it's just us, plebeians, we don't need cameras. You're asking yourself, what am I repeatedly observing competent people doing here in terms of email, in terms of the way they communicate and how they dress and how they're behaving in a particular meeting, whether it's in person or on Zoom. Phone etiquette, that's something to think about too, right? These are not things that you learn from just, one unique interaction. They're things that we pick up on over time. But you won't ever be able to pick up on them if you don't know that there are rules that exist in the first place. But sometimes there isn't even a pattern yet. Maybe this is a brand new situation. Maybe it's a new job, a new professor, a new committee you've joined. Maybe you don't have enough data yet to figure out the rule yet. And that's when we move to number 3, which is to read the stakes. Okay, what do I mean by read the stakes? The key question here is you would ask yourself, what are the consequences of this interaction? And who else is affected by what I do? Now, going back to the Facebook example, maybe nobody ever told that woman, okay, when someone makes a professional introduction for you, try to respond within 24 to 48 hours. Fair enough. But I would advise her, and it's what I'm advising here in this episode today. Okay, if you don't know the rule and you don't know any patterns yet because it's too soon, it's your first time, in a situation like that, look at the stakes in that particular scenario. Somebody did her a favor. We're using the Facebook example here, right? Somebody put their reputation on the line for her. Somebody agreed to give her their time. She herself was the person who stood to benefit from the whole thing. So there are stakes that are high here. She should have responded to that email pretty darn quickly. Even without reading the room, even without knowing what the pattern is, the stakes were high because other people were involved. In fact, the stakes were high because it could have led to a job opportunity and a connection. And when the stakes are high, that's a clue that there is some kind of rule there. All right, so let me break down what to think when you're weighing the stakes. I just ran through these with the Facebook example, but we're going to do another one. Ask yourself, who is affected by what I do or don't do? The more your actions or your behavior affects somebody else, so maybe their time, their reputation, their schedules, whatever it is, the higher the stakes. If there's multiple people involved, there's high stakes. If nobody else is affected, there may be more flexibility with the rule. I'm air quoting if you're not watching this on YouTube. The golden rule here is if there's multiple people affected or even one other person other than you, the stakes are higher, which means there probably is a rule there. Someone's waiting on me. That is a huge signal. If a professor, a colleague, a client, a manager, a potential connection, whatever, can't take their next step until you follow through on something that you're supposed to do, that's probably an implied expectation that you act in a certain way. We don't wait for someone to say, hey, this is super urgent. But if somebody is waiting on you to take an action before anybody else can proceed, that's a signal that the stakes are high and the implied rule is that you've got to act. Now, the third angle to think about is someone doing me a favor? Okay, this is directly relevant to the Facebook example. Again, when I say third rule, I mean third way to assess what the stakes are. If somebody is spending their time, their money, their reputation, maybe their social capital on your behalf, the stakes go up. And how you respond in that moment is going to matter. You can also ask yourself, how difficult would this be to undo? If you are making a critical decision, if you're doing something that has a permanent result that can't be changed, if you're submitting something that's becoming part of, an official record, if you have a really important job, I'd say that has higher stakes. And you're going to want to tread lightly. Don't be impulsive, and do assume that there is an expected way to behave in that situation. The higher the stakes, the higher the likelihood that there is a socially or professionally appropriate way to handle the situation that you're in. And if you don't know it, that would be your cue to slow down and look for the pattern. And then lastly, I want you to think of the opportunity cost if you get it all wrong. This connects back to the Facebook post. Again, the woman recognized after the fact that she had lost opportunities and that she had no idea she even lost. That was a conclusion that she made in retrospect after having learned that there was a rule she didn't know about. Some situations deserve more attention, intention, and thoughtful consideration before you take action, because reading that implied rule wrong could mean missed opportunities down the road. For example, let's just say you started a new job and you're invited to sit on a meeting with some senior people in the company. Nobody tells you what your role is supposed to be or what you're supposed to do at this hypothetical meeting, okay? Nobody says, hey, you're new here, so why don't you just listen and observe? But there could be an opportunity cost to getting this wrong. If you dominate the conversation, if you interrupt people or start, throwing out really strong opinions before you understand the context, you can make a bad impression that is really hard to fix. On the other hand, if you recognize that this is a higher stakes situation, you're new, there are senior people there, you don't understand the dynamics yet, that would be your signal to slow down, to read the room, to look for patterns, to be a little more intentional about how you participate. You could even ask somebody, hey, I'm going to my first meeting with the bossy people, not the bossy, but the bosses and the fancy people, what am I supposed to do here? Let me give you another example in an academic context. Let's say that you want to ask a professor for a recommendation letter. Maybe nobody has ever explicitly, said to you, hey, these are the rules for asking for a recommendation letter. Fair enough. I get that nobody would ever teach you that. I teach my students that. But anyways, you would look at the stakes. First, you are asking somebody to dedicate their time to doing you a favor. Their name and their reputation are on the line. And the letter could affect whether you get the job or into the program or whatever the opportunity is that you're looking for. All right, so that's a high opportunity cost. This is a situation where getting it wrong has a high opportunity cost. So that's when you would say, okay, I probably shouldn't fire off a 2-sentence email at midnight asking if they can write me a letter by Friday. You'd recognize the high stakes and you'd think to yourself, okay, there has to be an appropriate way to do this. Let me figure out what that is before I act. Now, I know that this episode might be making some of you feel nervous or anxious or insecure, thinking that there's 1,000 unwritten rules and everybody else knows and you don't know. That is not my goal, and that's definitely also not reality. You do not need to know every unwritten rule. That would be impossible. I don't even know them all. But that's the point of this episode. My punchline here is that you need to know that unwritten rules do exist. The way to succeed in work, in school, in social contexts, in any context you find yourself in, is to develop the ability to figure out these unwritten rules. As I talked about today, there are 3 ways that you can learn how to figure out what these unwritten rules are. Number 1 was to read the room. And the question you're asking yourself in that context is, what does this particular situation require of me? Number 2, you read the patterns. And you're asking yourself, what am I repeatedly observing competent people doing? And that's something that you would figure out and observe over time. And then number 3 was to read the stakes. You're asking yourself, who is affected? What could happen if I don't get this right? And lastly, too, if you can't figure it out, it's fine to ask. Honestly, that is not, that unprofessional. It's perfectly okay to say, hey, this is my first time doing, XYZ, what's normally expected there. Or, hey, this is my first staff meeting. Am I supposed to bring my computer? Those are all normal questions to ask. I have 2 back-to-back episodes that go really well here. I plan them to go back-to-back. Number 1, or episode 38, is how to be a resourceful person who can figure things out. And that's where I teach you how to figure these things out on your own so that you look independent and you can be the type of person who doesn't need their hand held all the time. But then episode 39 is how to ask for help when being resourceful isn't enough. And I teach you a strategy for doing that in a way that doesn't come across as needy or not resourceful. Okay, I could plug those 2 episodes right into this one and it would give you the full strategy for how to implement what we're talking about today. Now, as you move through your schooling, maybe you're in high school now and you're headed off to college, maybe you're in college, you're headed to grad school, maybe you're in grad school, you're headed off to your job, or you're already in a job and you're looking for another one, or looking for a promotion, whatever. As you move up and up, less and less, it's going to be explicitly spelled out for you. It's going to be expected that you know these unwritten rules, and being able to infer what's expected of you becomes more and more important as you level up, right? Again, the goal is not to become somebody who knows all of the rules. The goal is to become someone who knows how to figure out the rules. All right, and if you have any questions about this episode, feel free to submit them in the question form that is always in the description box and in the show notes. And that's also at learnandworksmarter.com/ask if you just want to go directly there. Remember, be sure to follow the show. Come find me on Instagram and TikTok, YouTube if you're not already watching there. If you are, hit subscribe. I appreciate you all. Keep showing up, keep doing the hard work, keep asking the hard questions, and never stop learning.